Creating recurring tasks in Notion has been a pain point for a lot of people for a long time. While they still may not be everyone's cup of tea, Notion has released lots of updates and new features over the years to make them, we'll say, a little bit more easy to do. Today I am sharing 5 different ways that you can handle recurring tasks in Notion using a range of different methods. And while this list isn't completely extensive, hopefully you can find a system that works best for you. Now, before I jump into our first method for recurring tasks, I want to quickly go over how I plan my tasks each week, just so you can see my workflow and so you can apply the way that I handle recurring tasks to your workflow. It makes a little bit more sense once you know what I'm doing on the back end of all my things. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. In my weekly planning page, this is where I do all of my planning for the week. My process is to first do a brain dump or a task dump here. So I have lots of buttons to kind of help me with that. I dump all the things that are in my brain that I need to do. I have some prompts here to help me. I can jot down notes if I want to, but typically I am just going straight to my brain dump section and dumping all the tasks I have. I'll categorize them, add due dates, all that kind of stuff. And then once I sort it, it goes out of my brain dump area and it goes into my top priorities, which is anything coming up in the next week, or all the way down here into someday, which is anything that's going to be past the next week. Once I have my tasks over here for this week specifically, don't mind my long to-do list, it's a little scary right now, I drag and drop things from this side onto the calendar, which assigns them an actual due date. I have 2 due dates. I start with my ideal due date first to kind of sort it by top priority, and then someday. And then I assign it an actual due date each week, because then I can make sure I'm not overloading my to-do list on all the things I have to do. I can be very intentional with what I am dropping on each day. I go over this a little bit more in my 2024 Notion tour from last year, so be sure to check that out if you want to learn more about that. But that is the general gist of everything I do. Again, this is my personal process. Yours might not look like that, but I do want to make sure that we are all on the same page before I jump into the recurring tasks themselves. Just another little side note too is that we are talking a lot about recurring tasks today, but these can apply to anything that you want to be recurring in Notion. So if you have bills or subscriptions, things like that, they can recur in the same way too. So the first way that I like to handle recurring tasks is using buttons. This is a really easy way to drop all of the tasks that you typically have recurring at one time into your task list. And it's also nice because it's a free feature, which we love. The only downside is that this is a little bit more of a manual process. You do have to press the button in order to enter those tasks into your database. But I do this occasionally. As you can see over here, I have multiple different buttons. These are mostly just hot buttons. So if I have a new business task, I can just press that and it's going to create a new task here for me that I can then give the name to the task, an ideal due date, focus and priority, all that kind of stuff. But I do have a couple of tasks that are actually set up. So content batching and content brainstorming. Those are things that I do, but I don't really have a frequency for doing them. It kind of depends on how far ahead I managed to batch or brainstorm the last time I did it. So whenever I feel like I'm ready to kind of brainstorm more things or batch more content, I'll just go ahead and press this button and add it to my to-do list. And when I do, you can see there's a lot more to it. It's already named. I have my focus set and my time commitment, all this kind of stuff. And I even have my content batching page linked in here, which is super nice. It does take a lot of the manual work for me out of trying to categorize the task before that goes into my top priorities for the week. Then I can just give it an ideal due date. So maybe I want a content batch next Tuesday, and then I'll sort it and then we'll be good to go. So the way I have this button set up here is in the settings. I am adding a new page to my tasks database, and it actually names it a task because I do have my tasks database set up as the tasks database in my home page, so it kind of recognizes that for me, which is kind of cool. But I do add it as a template for my biz task. So I have a bunch of templates here in my tasks database, and these are mostly those generic tasks that I'll end up wanting to add. And so with those, I use them as the template, the base template for all of the tasks that I do. So this is a biz task, and so I use that template. With that, it's going to add in a category for me, so I don't need to touch that specific property when I'm building out the rest of my task in this button. So the first thing I do is name my task. So I'll just choose all these different properties that there are here. I go ahead and choose the name category or task I have it named, and I'll go ahead and type in what I want it to be called. So this one is batch content. In the notes section, this is where I link my content batching. So I've added that one in. I've also assigned it to myself. I've given it a high priority because typically that is something that I really like to make sure happens. Then focus, which is deep work, and my time commitment, which is usually 60+ minutes. That is how I automate a lot of the creation of tasks that happen often, but they don't necessarily happen on a regular interval for me. Another example of this is in my content area. I have a button to add tasks for all of my YouTube videos. So typically when I go to create a new video, so next week we're doing a Notion tour, just a little heads up. When I go to create a new video, I have a little button in here to add to-dos. When I press that button, it's going to add all of the to-dos that go along with that specific video. So planning the video, filming it, editing, writing the description, and then creating the thumbnail. All of those are already set and ready for me. Again, I just add an ideal due date and we're ready to go. The second way to handle recurring tasks is to use a repeating template. I love using repeating templates because these kind of go on autopilot, so I don't have to be pressing buttons for them to run. It'll just run for me. And again, this is a free feature, which is awesome. One example of a recurring task that I have on autopilot is for me to write my paycheck. I always forget to do it unless I put it on my to-do list. This specific template is going to repeat for me every 2 weeks when I want to write my paycheck for myself. To set this up, I have just created a little template here for writing my paycheck, and so this is all set, ready to go. When I come over here to the 3 dots, I can hit this little repeat section right here, and that's where it's going to allow me to decide how often I want to have this repeat, and it will let you set that up based on the day and your frequency. So you have weeks, days, months, and years, and then you can just type in the number of how often you want it to actually repeat. I typically let mine go around midnight just because they'll actually notify you, and so if I wake up and I see a notification on there, it's a lot easier for me to handle it kind of in the morning when I'm looking at my day versus getting something in the middle of the day, because then I'm like, oh no, I have to do this and it'll distract me. The biggest trick here is that when you set up this template, you actually want to be sure that you're giving it a due date in the template itself. So if we edit this template right here, you'll see that I actually already have the due date set, and it says today, but what it's actually doing is it's going to be doing the date when it's duplicated. Whenever it gets duplicated, again, I have mine at every 2 weeks on Thursdays. If it gets duplicated, it's going to put the date that it is duplicated, which is nice because then you're not having to deal with the due date. It's just automatically assigning it to you on that day. This is a relatively new feature. It didn't used to be this way, but it's a big game changer because you can kind of get away with allowing it to repeat without you having to touch it. Now, while having those templates repeat on auto with the due date already set is fantastic, that is not my preference for all of my recurring tasks. As you can see, I had a lot of other templates here that are recurring, and all of these are cleaning tasks. So I'm gonna teach you a little bit of a different way that I handle recurring templates that lets me set the due date when I want it to be set versus it automatically setting it for me. I created this little trick to work specifically with the system that I have, with having my brain dump up here, my top priorities, and then dragging my tasks and giving them an ideal due date. So if you don't have this exact same setup, that's okay. You can still implement something like this. Just have a place where you know that your workflow is created to specifically allow you to give it a due date somewhere. I kind of have that happening when I'm dragging and dropping, so that's why this works. So I'll show you really quick the way I have my template set up. So if we pop into the sweeping and mopping floors task, I have this one repeating weekly. Let me check the repeat really quick, every 1 week on a Friday. Now the reason I do Fridays is because that is when I actually do my weekly planning. So what happens is all of the cleaning tasks that I need to do for the next week populate on Friday when I do my planning, and then I can just drag and drop them onto the next week and give them an actual due date. For example, if I just go ahead and create one of these templates really quick, typically this will auto repeat for me and I don't have to do any of this process. It's just ready for me to go. If I come here to my cleaning section, all of the cleaning tasks that I'll have to do for the next week are here waiting for me to categorize them, or at least give them a due date, and then I'll just go ahead and drag and drop them onto my task list for the week. I really like this method because I can set all of my cleaning tasks to repeat on here. I even have weird things like dusting the bathroom walls, which I do like every 6 months, or cleaning the air filters every 6 months. Things that I would typically forget about doing, I just let them recur and then I can handle them when they show up in my list to do. But again, allowing myself to assign a due date later on is really important to me, because if these were just repeating randomly and showing up on my task list, especially things like sweeping and mopping the floors, which is kind of a big thing for me to do each week. We have a lot of hardwood. And so if that was just repeating and happening to show up on my task list, it would be very overwhelming to me. So getting to pick the day that I actually do that is really important, and I like having that option for myself. The fourth way to handle recurring tasks is nice for the people who may be like, okay, this is cool, but I can't see a calendar of what I'm doing ahead of time. Totally understand. That's one of the biggest complaints about recurring tasks in Notion, is that you can't see what's coming up on the calendar, which again, kind of why I have that little buffer for myself of allowing myself to add a due date to those recurring tasks, even though I'm not touching them. But in this method, we're going to be using automations, which is a paid feature, but you can do the same thing with buttons on a free version. So I'll show you both of these options. And for this, I'm going to go into an example database here, just so we have a place to play around a little bit with the automations. So in this example, what we're going to do is when a task is marked complete, we are going to change the due date by a certain recur interval. So I have a hidden property on this database. I'll go ahead and show it just so you can see what it is, and it is a recur interval in days. You can get a little bit more fancy with this and have some labels like weeks or days or months, depending how often you want things to be recurring. However, I just find it easiest within the formulas to pick days to go off of, even if it's something that's going to be like 3 months long. If you say, I want this to recur every 90 days, that's generally the same time frame, and it's a little bit easier for the coding portion of this because we will have to do a little bit of coding. So we're gonna head to our automations over here where we can create and view them in our database. And we are going to add a new automation so that when a task gets marked complete, so we'll come here and change the option to complete. What we'll do is we're going to edit a property in the task that got marked complete, and we want to make the task not complete anymore. We're going to restart it, so it's going to go back to not started, and then we're going to change the due date. So we're going to come in here and choose a custom formula for our due date. So now what we'll do is we're going to use our trigger page, which is the page that we just marked complete, to call in the information about the due date and then add those recur interval days to that date. So we'll go ahead and choose our trigger page, and then we're going to use a notation that you can kind of see down here in our little examples. It's just a little dot, and then we're going to call the next function, and that's just a way to use functions. You probably have seen them, just the little parentheses and the information inside. This is basically a way to put the first argument, which typically is going to be included inside your parentheses. We're just using it here in the front instead of inside the parentheses. That's what's going on. So now that I have my little dot, I'm going to call in the due date, and then we're going to use, look at it's already kind of got it for us here. We're going to use the date add function. Now for our number of days, we're going to use that recur interval property. So just like we called the due date, we're going to do the same thing. We want our trigger page dot recur interval. Then our second argument is going to be days, just so it knows what it's adding to the date. You want to make sure it's a plural days. As you can see here in the little examples, you have years, quarters, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes. It just needs to be plural here. Then we'll go ahead and press save. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens. If I add in a new task here, we'll just call this guy our example task, and I give it the due date of today. And then let's say I want this task to recur every 7 days, so every week. And now if I mark this task complete, I'll go ahead and press that button. We're gonna see that that due date is going to change, and then this will become not completed. There we go. How cool was that? Now, I do want to note that if you don't want to use a property for your recur interval, if you just have a certain amount of tasks that you're going to be having recur like this, you could create a separate automation for each of those recurring tasks. So if I change this automation that we just created, what I'll actually do is I will name it based on the task that I'm having recur. So if this is our example task, I'm going to say example task recur. And that's how I know which one we're working with. And we can do this for any task that we have recurring. What we're going to do is we're going to come into this trigger section and we want to add a second trigger. What we'll do is we'll look for the task property and then we want it to contain the name of our task. So in this case, our task is called example task. We want to make sure that that's what it says here in this section. And then what I'm going to do in the due date area is instead of using that recur interval that we added, we're just going to put in those 7 days. And what's nice about this is that if you don't want to use days here, if you want to use weeks or months, you totally can, and it can be different for each of the tasks that you have recurring. So this can be unique for those tasks. Okay, so let's give it a go and see what happens. If we go ahead and press complete again, we'll see that our due date is going to change another 7 days, and then our task is again going to be marked back to the not started status. And so if you choose to go this route where you create an automation for each of the tasks that you have recurring, you do not need to have this recur interval property. You can leave that out. However, if you don't have the paid version of Notion and you still want to make this happen, you can with a button. So what we'll do is we're going to come here and add a new property, and that's going to be a button property. And you can name this whatever is going to make most sense for you. If you want to say set next due date, you totally can here. It's whatever is going to make most sense for you. So if I say set next due date, we'll know that we are going to be changing the due date. I'm going to pop it back to today just so we're working a little bit closer in time. And then what I would encourage you for this, while we're going to set up the same little automation as we did here, you might not want to trigger it off completion. If your database is filtered to not show completed tasks and you mark it completed, and then you're going to notice that your task disappears and you're not going to be able to press the button to set the next due date. By using this specific button, you might find that you're not going to be using the done checkbox when you're completing your tasks, and that's okay. Really what we're doing is setting our next due date. That's the most important thing for us. So let's go ahead and edit our automation here. So we don't need to add a trigger because the button is the trigger in this case. We'll go ahead and add a new action here to edit the property, and we're just going to edit our due date here using the same formula that we used when we created our first automation. So instead of trigger page, we're using this page here. We're going to search for our due date just like we did before. .date add. Again, use this page, find our recur interval, and then add days to the end of our function. So now when we press this button, it's going to edit our due date based on our recur interval. There's no lag like there is in the automation. You will see that change happen right away. Now, because this is a property that spans the entire database, you do want to have that recur interval property. You can't make a button specific for each page that you have. So if you don't use this recur interval property, it's going to always edit your due date, whatever you have here in your formula for this section. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do the custom version, you'll want to go the automation route over here. Now, our final option for creating recurring tasks is using the brand new automations feature that was just added in Notion, which is very exciting. This is a paid feature, so if you're on a paid plan, you'll be able to use this. This option is going to feel very similar to the recurring templates in your database. In fact, I may be switching some of my cleaning tasks that I have here as repeating templates to using the automation instead, just to kind of clean up my templates because there's a lot of them. But just know you have options if you're not on the paid plan here. So I'm going to create a new automation so we can take a look at how this works. And for our trigger, we're actually going to use this new where it's called every. And so this means it's going to be looking at the frequency that you have set up, and then it'll do something based on that frequency. So it doesn't even have to be creating tasks. It can be editing the tasks or doing something within your database, but I am going to have this create a task for us in this case because we are handling recurring tasks. So we have some options already built in for us. We can do every weekday, every week, every 2 weeks, every month. If we choose the week option, we're going to get a little bit more flexibility, and same with the day or month. We can choose how often we want this to be, when we want this to happen, which day of the week, and then when we want this to start as well. So if I just go ahead and leave this every week on a Monday, that's fine for this example. We're gonna go ahead and add our action to be adding a page to our task database. And in this example, I'm using an example database. Then we get to add in all the information that we would in our recurring template. So the name of our task and then our due date or anything else you might be adding. I'm gonna go ahead and name this guy recurring task just to keep it a little bit different from my example task. And then I'm also going to edit my due date here. In this case, I'm gonna set this to be the date that the trigger occurs to make sure it's due on that date. However, because we have the custom formula option now, we can go ahead and have something recur and then choose a different date than what we have the options for time or date triggered. We can also pick a date, but no, this is going to be static. So once you've picked one, it's always going to be that date. And the custom formula is really going to give you that option. You can date add, date subtract. It's totally up to you. In this case though, I'm gonna go ahead and choose our date triggered. Now I don't have too many other properties that I wanna edit here because I am using this little example database. In my bigger task database, I'd be adding in my categories, my focus, my time commitment, all of those different things that I typically add into my tasks. But here we're just gonna keep these couple properties filled. And so that is all you need to do to set up an automation like this. And now every week on Monday, it will create a new task for me. Okay, I know that was a lot of options for recurring tasks, but I hope at least one of these will be a good fit for you in your workspace. I'm curious which method that you liked best, so be sure to let me know down below in the comments. And as always, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments too. Now, I have had lots of requests for an updated 2025 Notion tour. So in the next video, I'll be showing you all the behind the scenes of my entire Notion setup. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Until then, watch this video next to see exactly how I time block all of my tasks in Notion Calendar. I will see you in the next one.